Hi, Amanda here. Thanks for coming back. Today we're going to talk about step 3 in the development of your school's emergency operations plan. Step 3 is determine goals and objectives. This step continues the process for gathering information to include and update your school's emergency operations plan document. In step 2, we identified the threats and hazards and resources using different assessments, and we assessed and prioritized those risks and vulnerabilities posed by those threats and hazards. Now, in step 3, we'll determine which of the threats and hazards you identified will be addressed in the EOP, and we'll be addressing the ones that are the high and medium threats and hazards. And then once those are identified, which you did in step 2, we're going to develop goals and objectives for each of those identified threats and hazards. School personnel are already familiar with creating goals and objectives for instruction. The school's emergency operation plan may already have goals and objectives within it. What may be new to address is creating goals and objectives around areas such as behavior before, during, and after an identified threat or hazard. For example, how will you address communication in regards to social media before, during, and after an event? I know that this is a reminder that goals are broad general statements that indicate desired outcomes in response to a threat or hazard, which you identified in the step 2 of the planning process. They're what personnel and other resources are supposed to achieve, and they also help identify when major activities are complete and what defines a successful outcome. Goals should be developed for before, during, and after a threat or hazard. And then finally, you develop several objectives to address each goal. Remember that objectives are specific, measurable actions that are necessary to achieve the goals. And the goals and the objectives are to provide the roadmap for the school's emergency planning and lay the groundwork for the courses of action, which we'll cover in step 4. As an example, we'll look at some fire goals. The planning team should develop at least 3 goals for addressing each threat or hazard. However, you can always identify more if you feel that it's necessary. Those 3 goals should indicate the desired outcomes for before, in this case, to prevent a fire from occurring; during, we want to protect all persons from injury and property damage by the fire; and after, provide necessary medical attention to those in need. Then you're going to want to identify several objectives to achieve each goal. You're going to have your before objective, possibly storing combustible materials; during, evacuating all persons from the building; and after, you might want to provide immediate first aid. If your goal after an event is to provide medical care for people injured, then your objectives might be to notify fire officials and EMS personnel or fire via 911 and begin to provide that basic first aid for anyone who may be injured. The more specific the planning team can be as they define the objectives, the more likely the staff will be able to follow them. And there's some questions you might want to ask while you're creating your objectives. For instance, how are you going to prepare for and respond to each threat? What are the school's capabilities to prepare and respond? For example, access to classrooms and another facility if you get displaced from the school for a period of time. Or can you add a few school hours onto the day for 2 or 3 days to make up any time that you may have lost in the classroom? And what are your school's vulnerabilities? Your distance from services, are you far away? The structural integrity of older buildings. I was just recently at a meeting with a school district, and they were reviewing their mitigation for their schools in case of an earthquake. And what they determined is that if there was an earthquake of 6.5 or greater, the likelihood that there was going to be major structural damage that was going to cost quite a bit was relatively high. They had older buildings, so they were only able to do so much. They understood what those vulnerabilities were, but what they did do is they addressed what they could, what they were capable of. They replaced all the windows with shatterproof glass. So even though they could not afford to build a new school with earthquake capabilities to be withstood of an earthquake, they were able to do what they could within their capabilities. They understood what their vulnerabilities were, and they addressed that in their emergency operations plan. And again, another question is, who's going to prepare and respond for a particular threat or hazard? Is it going to be staff, administration? Are there local partners that will need to be involved? Police, fire, emergency medical? The identified objectives could be used to create checklists for the response to the threat and hazards. The checklists can be shared with the staff, such as the tool of having a checklist within each classroom to know what to do in any particular event. And it can also be shared with local emergency management services, fire, other emergency response teams. For example, do those local partners know where your chemicals are stored? Who has keys to the building? Have you supplied keys to sheriff's departments, fire departments, so that they can get in if no one's available immediately? Do they have access to classrooms? What about storage areas? Where are the entrance and exit points for the school? Do the fire, does the police department, does the hospital, do they have maps of your school so that they know where the entrance and exits are? Do they have a map on how to get to your school? We found in many of our trainings around Montana that some of the more rural schools, if there are new staff on emergency medical services, they may or may not know how to even get to your school. So are there maps for them to get to your school in a timely manner? So the objectives are going to become the guide for developing your courses of action within your plan, and we will talk about courses of action in step 4. The goals and objectives that are identified, remember, they must be realistic, must be likely to be achievable, and they have to be measurable. How can you tell whether or not you've achieved them? After the teams finish compiling the objectives for the prioritized threats and hazards, it'll find that certain critical functions or activities apply to more than one threat or hazard. So for example, of these cross-cutting functions, they might include evacuation, shelter in place, providing medical care, and communicating with school staff, students, families, and the general public. So after identifying these functions, the planning team should develop 3 goals for each function. As with the goals already identified for threats and hazards, the 3 goals should indicate the desired outcome for before, during, and after the function has been executed. So for example, communication is a common function in all emergencies. Rather than list the same communication goals and objectives for every emergency, the entire function can be covered by one functional annex in the school emergency operations plan. Then, as the team addresses each specific threat or hazard, they do not have to recreate the communication piece for every event. We'll be discussing the functional annexes, such as communication, in more depth in step 5. Within your school's emergency operations plan, write goals and objectives to support a communications plan. If you have a plan already, review the plan and edit it as necessary. Save your work, because this will be a foundation for 2 more activities. The critical cross-cutting function, including communication and coordinating internal, external, and technological needs before, during, and after event. Many major disasters have reported in their after-action reports that communication was often the single point of failure within their plans. So either review and edit your existing communications plan or begin writing goals and objectives for a new plan. Consider those internal, external, and technological issues within the goals and objectives. How will students and staff be notified if an in-school or they're on a school-sponsored trip or students are on a bus? Consider language barriers and students and staff with disabilities. How will you notify first responders, families? Remember, not all families have access to phones with text messaging or computers to receive messages. How will you respond to the media? Who will talk to them? When will you talk to them? Where will you talk to them? In the Sandy Hook event, they had a separate area set up strictly for media, and they had specific times that they announced when they would speak to media. By doing that, they were able to have a little bit better control of the media during the event, and they were not constantly being pulled away from working on the event in order to talk to media. Do you have a public information officer or someone designated to speak to the media? Or are you allowing anyone to speak to the media? Do you have any protocols in your plan that say who will speak to the media? Do you have backups to your technology systems if the electricity goes out? How are you going to communicate to staff in school and out of school? Are you going to use radios and cell phones? What are those backups? And how will those be incorporated? So those are some of the things that you would be considering when you're looking at goals and objectives and you're looking at a communications and warning critical cross-cutting function. And this is one example that you'll use, and as you see, as we get further in the process, there's a number of other functions or functional annexes that you'll go through the same process with, and they will apply to the majority, they will apply to your threats and hazards that you've already developed.